the thought I had on the car industry became sort of complete conventional wisdom within minutes, which is there were sort of two ways to go about this. Obama could have said, just use the lever of we're not going to give you any more money. Sorry, I guess you're going to have to go to bankruptcy, and gotten concessions, and either then given money or let them go to bankruptcy. But the whole restructuring or whatever happens to General Motors would have been done by somebody else, by the bankruptcy court,
right?
By other people.
As you may recall, I favored that, but you. At least I was extremely skeptical of government intervention, but you insisted that no, you thought it was a good idea that Obama get involved in this, and you're
Did I really say that?
Yeah, you were. We neither of us quite took a formal position, but you were leaning heavily pro bailout, and I was leaning anti. That was clear. Yes.
No, I was for giving them the extra money. Yeah, but that to that extent. But what he's done now is he's rolled up his sleeves and gotten deep into the bowels of General Motors, and it seems to be basically attempting to run General Motors. And his point guy is this guy Steve Ratner, who knows all the journalists that we know.
Yeah, whose name his given name is Stephen Ratner, and by the way, you spelled it on your blog as Seven Ratner, but you can tend to that later.
Jesus. Thanks for that.
He's a former journalist. He's a former New York Times journalist, and then got into venture capital or investment banking.
Yeah, media venture capitalism, and then he broke away from I think Lazard Fair and started his own hedge fund, which has not done very well. He closed a couple of them, and he invested a lot in Maxim and Stuff magazine.
Well, media it turns out, was just a bad business to begin, and that's what he was in.
Well, but. So the guy can't run Maxim magazine, and now he's running General Motors. I mean, there's at least an initial question. And then the Obama people, if you read the report, and this has been pointed out by a couple people like Ann Althouse, not Ann Althouse, Megan McArdle, sorry. I get my...
Easy to get them mixed up. They've both been on Blogging Heads TV.
Right. Mm-hmm. But they have the basic yuppie reaction to General Motors as, gee, they're not like Toyota. They should be designing small Apple-like cars that we want to buy with flexible work rules, and and so we're going to go do these obvious things that the General Motors executives have been too stupid to do for several decades. And it can't be that easy, and you can't just go to General Motors and say, get me a new culture, and I make it snappy. Part because General Motors has a union and Toyota doesn't. It's a little like invading Vietnam. I mean, why does Obama want to get hip deep in this problem? I don't know.
Well, but don't you think this was to some extent kind of implicit in the thing from the beginning, that they would wind up in very much this situation?
No, he could say you're not viable, you're not getting any more money, we'll give you money for 60 days. After that, you're on your own, buddy. This is capitalism.
Well, that's kind of what he's...
business. You're a private business. You go do what capitalists do when they get into trouble, which is go into bankruptcy.
Well, okay, but the history of government getting involved in things is that they don't get uninvolved as easily as you're making it sound.
Just writing a check and sort of being held responsible for closing individual plants, which, if you say we want to build small cars and you close a large car plant, the large car plant people are going to be pissed off at Stephen Ratner.
Yeah.
In a way that they wouldn't be.
This sounds kind of bad to me. It's like, I don't know how they could have the wisdom to know who should replace Wagoner or whether he should have gone in the first place. And it's the kind of thing where you wonder whether politics plays a role. And this is another argument against the government getting involved, probably, whether politics plays a role in the degree of intervention we're seeing. Because, you remember this quote from Obama on 60 Minutes: if there's one thing the American people hate more than bailing out the banks, it's bailing out the auto companies. So he was aware that he's on kind of dicey terrain, and it could be that getting rid of Wagoner was politically tempting, because it's a way of conveying to the American people, don't worry, this isn't like the banks where the fat cats continue to make their bonuses. We're getting a pound of flesh in exchange for your tax dollars.
I question the premise whether bailing out the auto companies is less popular than bailing out the banks.
No, I think he had the poll data. They were talking about a specific poll on 60 Minutes.
I wonder if that was a pre-AIG poll.
I think it could show that the American people know what they're doing, which is the argument I was making to you was that government intervention is warranted when you have when you're talking about an industry where collapse is particularly contagious, such as the financial industry. And I just don't think the auto industry or any other manufacturing industry is like that.
On the way home, Bob, I heard as I was driving through Arizona, I heard a country song. They're bailing out Wall Street while they're letting Detroit go down. This was a protest. This was a protest song, Bob.
Well, that's the populist version of it, but that's not. I think they polled some people who were not in that demographic. Maybe I'm not positive I'm right, but that was what I understood from the discussion, was that there was a poll that showed this. But in any event, don't you think it's plausible that it's politically tempting for Obama, now that he's in the business of putting tax dollars into GM, that he thought he needed to show that, a head would roll, it wouldn't be business as usual? Don't you think it was a tempting call to fire, politically tempting to fire Wagoner?
Yes, and it got everybody's attention, and it made people realize, hey, we're serious about this.
And that's a problem with getting the government into this, is because all these political temptations cloud your judgment.
But you could stop there and not get around to dictating corporate strategy to General Motors, which I'm worried he's getting into. Now there is one advantage. Well, anyway, so there's. I think he could stop. He could back out before it's too late. I can't believe he thinks He wants Steve Ratner running General Motors.
Well, no, he seems to be leaving the loophole, and saying, well, we may wind up in bankruptcy anyway, and you've got 60 days to shape up your act, which is what you think he should have said earlier.
Well, I like that part of it.
Right, but you've got the worst of both worlds. I mean, half of the argument for government intervention was people saying, oh, no, if anybody breathes the word bankruptcy, no one will ever buy a car again, which I thought was kind of an unfounded assertion to begin with. Well, now they're saying the word bankruptcy, you've got the worst of both worlds. There's as much doubt as ever swirling around GM.
A couple of things. Nobody knows if this threat of bankruptcy if he's serious about it. He's leaked that he favors that, and David Brooks says,
the new head of GM, just before we got on, I checked the front page of the New York Times. The new head of GM, who's replacing Wagoner, said the chances of bankruptcy have gone up.
Well, everybody's threatening that, and the best article, the best new thing I've read on bankruptcy is on Tom McGuire's blog. He points out that it's one thing to extract concessions from the union if Ron Gettelfinger says, okay, we're cutting the wage from 24 to 20, that's it. No individual worker can say, well, I want 24. Sorry, I'm not going along with this.
Right.
But bondholders do have that power. Bondholders can say, hey, you go ahead, you take your haircut and take 16 cents on the dollar. I'm holding out for 100 cents on the dollar.
You know what we need then? We need collective bargaining for bondholders.
That's sort of what bankruptcy is. And there was a big bondholder named PIMCO that held out during the GMC financing and won. The government blinked. They did not have to take the haircut. Everybody else took the haircut. So that lesson is not lost on these bondholders, and they're all holding out. And there's no way to corral them the way there is with the workers and the unions. The only thing that could corral them, there's a huge free rider problem. The only way to corral them is bankruptcy. So this is all directed at the bondholders to get them not to emulate PIMCO. And maybe it will take bankruptcy to actually do that. The other thing that's changed is everybody was worried that if there was talk of bankruptcy, GM sales would plummet. Well, GM sales have already plummeted.
Right.
Car sales are down 70%, okay?
For GM, you mean for GM, not for cars in general?
For GM, yeah. Passenger cars. The trucks are down less, but the cars are down heavily. So the damage is already done.
Right.
They might as well declare bankruptcy at this point, or a lot of the damage is already done. Obviously, there'd be some more damage, but
should have just done bankruptcy in the first place.
Sorry?
I said just should have done bankruptcy in the first place.
Well, you may be proven right, but anyway, I think there is time for Obama to pull back and say, "Hey, we're going to let impersonal business processes take care of this." So I don't have my fingerprints on every plant closing in America.
Yeah.